Welcome back to This Is How We Create. My name is Martine Severin, your host. You know that story we tell ourselves, the one where if you just work hard enough and believe in your vision, everything falls into place? Well, Aleia Kristene lived that story. Aleia moved to LA with a dream and a degree, then spent months homeless, rationing meals, sleeping on strangers' couches, all for the craft. And now, well, she's doing something most screenwriters don't get a chance to do. She's actually helping other people write their own stories instead of just talking about her own hustle. So, here on the podcast today, we're going to talk about the stuff nobody wants to admit, like whether or not that suffering for your art narrative is really a necessary one or just trauma we've rebranded as dedication. I am so pleased to welcome Aleia to the show. Aleia, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
This episode is brought to you by iCode. Every child starts as a creator. They imagine stories, build worlds, and ask big questions. But as they grow up, creativity can take a backseat to routine and screens. That's where iCode comes in. Through after-school STEM activities, iCode's programs give kids a space to create again. Visit icodeschool.com to book a free trial. Well, Aleia, I would love to start out with you by talking about how at 9 years old you started thinking about screenwriting.
Oh man. I mean, always being, I guess, attracted to storytelling, you know what I mean? I've always enjoyed reading. I think that's kind of where it originated from, being a reader, my mom reading to me as a kid, and then understanding that through these stories, you can kind of escape, from the real world for a little bit. So, yeah, watching, the special features on the DVDs and just being intrigued on how the movies and things of that nature were created. And yeah, I just eventually pulled out my wide rule paper one day and pencil and just started, crafting my own idea of, a story that I wanted, something that I wanted to see.
Can you bring us back to that moment when you took out that notebook? As a screenwriter, you know how to paint pictures. So paint a picture for us about that process and tell us what your story was about.
So the first story or script I wrote when I was 9, I think at the time I may have been a big sister to 2 at the moment. I'm trying to think on like the time period. Yeah, I think I had 2 little siblings at the time and just, so because it was a huge age gap in between us, a lot of time I, did spend to myself in my room alone. And I just remember, pulling out that notepad one day and actually writing like my own African American version of like Cinderella, but it was the difference. I know we have the one with Brandy and Whitney Houston, but the difference with mine was like it was a male version. I try to write things that I haven't really seen before, so it was a male version of Cinderella that I called Cinderella. Of course, back then I didn't know all of the structure when it came to screenwriting, but for some reason I knew how to write the scene headings and descriptions and obviously the dialogue between the characters, and that had never been taught to me. So guess it's just something, that was just in me.
No, who knows what's gonna happen now that you've talked about it, you've put it out there once again.
Right.
Hmm, who knows?
Who knows?
So you said that you watched Friday and Boys in the Hood instead of cartoons as a kid. Can you talk to me a little bit about what those films showed you about storytelling that Disney and all of the cartoons couldn't tell you?
I think it exposed me to just real life. You know what I'm saying? Things that I may, could walk outside and potentially see or run into. You know what I mean? Like it just prepared me for things as a kid, and it just opened up my eyes to, what we as, black people were experiencing. It was just more relatable for me. I have very few cartoons. I could probably count on one hand how many cartoons I watched as a kid. And I think, like, the cartoons I did gravitate towards are more like the ones that were, I feel like, more, like, human-like, you know what I mean? Like, the conversations, I just didn't like I gravitated towards more, like, just realistic conversations, like, I'm not, like, a baby
Mm.
talk type person, you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
those stories like Boys in the Hood and Friday and Set It Off, I feel like just put a spotlight on our stories, and it just drew me in, you know what I mean? Since I was, very young.
I can just imagine it because you grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, right?
Mhm, mhm.
So you're in Jacksonville, Florida with palm trees. And
Mhm,
then you're like looking at Boys in the Hood
mhm,
and Friday
mhm.
and seeing such a really interesting development in characters that are going across the screen, which I think would probably have been a little bit different than growing up in Jacksonville, right? Or
Yeah,
maybe not.
yeah, I feel like it relates as far as, like, just the type of people you may see, because 'cause they're
Mhm.
similar people, around. You have your poorer neighborhoods or, things of that nature. So, yeah, I feel like just the familiarity with that probably, yeah.
Well, you have definitely gone through difficult times because you had so many of your family members who were diagnosed with ALS.
Mhm,
And I can hear I can think I always like to think about what my listeners are going to say because there are other people who want to be screenwriters who are listening or people who want to be writers and they want to write about something that's really personal,
mhm.
right? But to write about something very personal is a little bit tricky. So I'm just thinking about the fact that you were in grief counseling and you decided to write your family's ALS story as a screenplay. Can you talk a little bit about how do you structure something that's so personal without it becoming therapy on the page instead of compelling drama?
That's a good question. Definitely kinda tricky. So when I first wrote the script, which is called Four Voices Unheard, it actually it actually was a very, very long script because this is over 20 years of, tragedy after tragedy, you know what I mean? Starting with my grandmother who passed, from ALS 3 months before I was born, up until the way the story is written is up until I think like 2015, 2016, because it's been a while since I wrote it. And that was before it was actually five family members. It was just four at the time. So you have, all this information. And like I said, I think initially when I wrote the script, just to get everything out, because I was like, how do I structure so much information in, an hour and a half or 2 hours or whatever. So initially, I forgot who it was. Someone gave me advice. It was another writer at the time. He gave me advice and he said, just get it all out. So when I first wrote the first draft of Four Voices I Heard, it had to be like maybe 220 pages, like something crazy, which is a very, very long script. And then from there, it was a thing of, okay, I ended up doing a table read in Atlanta with a bunch of different actors. I think it was like maybe 10 to 15 actors came out and, for free read my script and, allowed me and my mom to come and just hear it out loud. It was very emotional for me and my mom, but just to hear it out loud and then also just gain feedback on, what they thought would make it better, which is very helpful. But to answer your question from there, after you, I feel like if anyone is going to take this route of writing their personal story into a screenplay, after you get everything out, then from there you kind of just want to follow the structure of like how can we keep all of the emotional like parts of it in, but like make it sellable to Hollywood. So I ended up minimizing a lot of things that happened that could be taken out, and then I ended up writing it into a four-part limited series. So that's, 4 hours instead, and yeah, just kinda structuring it around that, something that would be, like I said, just more sellable. Um, so yeah.
How long did that process take you? Until you got to the point of thinking about, "Okay, well, this is really long." You had you were able to have everyone come and read out different parts and
Mhm,
hear how it felt,
mhm.
and then you decided to have it be a four-part series. How long did that whole process take?
For that script in particular, so that I finished the script in like 2016, and the table read wasn't until 2018 or 19. The way time is flying, but I think it was like 2019. I think it was when I first moved out to LA, and then I came back to Atlanta for a weekend to do the table read. But so just that's like a 3-year time span. And then from there, I went back and rewrote it, split everything, into the 4-part series and, took out just kind of fluff of the script. And so maybe like a little over 3 years. But I mean, it typically doesn't have to take that long. It's just from the time, realistically, when I first wrote it, I was still in college until gaining access and just going through life and learning more about the industry and what a table read is and how that can be valuable and things of that nature. So I didn't know what a table read was in college. You know what I mean? I didn't. So, it's just things that I end up learning and, eventually networking and having resources to do those type of things.
I think some people listening don't know what a table read is.
Mhm.
Can you tell us what that is?
So a table read is when you gather actors, whether union or non-union or whatever, you gather actors. Typically it's in person, but nowadays we're on Zoom. But yeah, you gather these actors, you assign everybody a role or two or three, just depending on how many characters you have in your script. And you literally go through the entire script and read and just hear your characters come to life, your words come to life. And I recently even did that table read via Zoom. This was like 2 months ago on a Christmas feature I wrote, and I asked for volunteers on, like, Threads and Instagram, and it was really cool. It was really, really fun. I hadn't done one since 2019, so to do one on Zoom with, like, strangers and some people, who I'm friends with, volunteering their time. Took us, like, 2 hours to read through it. That was really cool.
Yeah, and I think it's more common than people would think,
Mhm.
that usually it is table reads are a part of the process.
Right.
All right. So I'm gonna skip forward a few years
Okay.
when you were a PA and
Mhm.
director's assistant on pretty big movie sets. One of those sets was The Hate You Give.
Mhm.
Can you talk about some of the specific power dynamics or production realities that you observed that changed how you now write scripts?
I feel like just being a PA in general, you see that the PA is one of the hardest working people on set because they're running around, literally doing some of everything, you name it, whether it's running errands for producers off set, whether it's going to print extra copies of the script, whether it's handling talent, getting the actors to the set and driving, those big vans fetching for I've done everything, fetch for breakfast for like 20, 30 people, it's a lot of work. But I would say it definitely, also exposed me to just how much money goes into everything. So I feel like from being on set, I've learned that even when writing, my next script or whatever, like just keeping in mind, like maybe condensing like how many locations you have and stuff like that. A lot of that stuff comes into factor that people don't think about. When I went through the process, or even just not solely just working on set, but even just going through the process of trying to sell a script and speaking to producers, understanding that, if you have locations, like, the less locations and different things like that can factor into the chances of your script being made. So those are things I keep in mind when writing. I try not to, restrict myself too much, but those are things, realistically that, you will think of just because, you've been around it and you've seen it, close up, how that process goes.
Oh my gosh, Leah, I feel like some of the things that you're sharing is a gold mine for
Mhm.
people who are just starting. Think about when you were first
Yeah,
starting, right? And
yeah,
some of the things that you didn't know.
yeah.
I heard that every page on a script or in a script is a whole day's worth of shooting,
Mhm,
right? Is that
mhm.
kind of
Typically not if you're Tyler Perry, but
mhm.
yeah, typically, 'cause, he shoots quick. I don't know.
Does
Yeah,
he?
yeah, yeah. I don't know if you've heard, but lately, I mean, he can shoot a feature film in like a week or two, and that's unheard of. Like usually it's like a month and a half, sometimes 2 months, but he's been doing like a week and a half lately. Even with a lot of his shows, I've heard that he shoots 2 or 3 episodes a day. So, but
Dang,
yeah, but typically, yeah,
that's a lot of
yeah.
lines.
See, I'm trying to think, like, when I was a director's assistant on the film The Trap, that was my first film when I, graduated from college. I think we shot for a month and a half, and typically it was maybe like a page and a half. It just depends,
Mhm.
and the budget. The bigger the budget, I feel like the longer you have, but if you're working with, like, a smaller budget for hour and a half film, then you probably have to get out more pages a day, you know what I mean?
Oh, wow. I mean, the other thing that people don't realize is how many people will work on a film, even if it's a small production, right? And that's why I absolutely, I'm one of those annoying people who sit there and I will read, or as much as I can, the names of all the people who worked on that film,
Yeah.
because we credit the stars.
Mhm.
Oh, you did such a great job, or we credit the directors, but there is like a small town usually
Yeah.
that's working
Yeah,
on a film
that was
set.
mind-blowing to me, honestly, when I first so the first actual set I worked on, I was still in college. I think I was in my junior year at FAMU, and I found, like, the little casting for an extra on what was that Melissa McCarthy movie? The Life of the Party. But I think back then they had, like, a code name or whatever, but they were wanting college students. I was in college. It was gonna be a 4-hour drive. I was like, "Let me just sign up and see." And I remember going on set and just seeing how much really went into shooting, like, one little scene, you know what I mean? Like, they had probably hundreds of us as college students just to be in the background and walk from here to here, and it's literally people telling you, like, each group of students, like, where to walk and, like, and you're doing it over and over. Like, it's so much. It's so much that goes into it. All of that is calculated and rehearsed, and, you have continuity where, like, even if you guys take a day off and have to come back and shoot that same scene, like, you have to look exactly how you look the next day. Like, everything has or the day before, like, everything has to be in place. Like, it's very, strict. You know what I mean? Like, how they shoot. It's a lot of work that goes into it. I don't think people realize that.
Yeah. And now you're kind of like on the other side where you are having coaching workshops.
Mhm,
So your screenwriting coaching workshops themselves, they help people get their big ideas on paper in 30 days.
mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about what's the biggest mistake you sometimes see aspiring screenwriters make when they're trying to structure their story?
I think the biggest thing I've seen is maybe, like, just over describing things, like having too much, what do you call them, like action lines in scripts. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but you always have, like, when you start a scene, you have, like, your scene header, and then you have the description lines before you get to the dialogue. And I mean, I had to learn that myself, but I feel like that's one of the biggest issues I've seen is, like, people being, like, overly descriptive, because you have to remember that, like, I feel like it's minimal description, then your lines, like, the actors are going to, bring out what you're trying to tell. If you're good at that, you don't have to overly describe. You don't have to have, like, a paragraph between, each piece of dialogue, but I feel like that's one of the main things I've seen.
So I have to say that I wrote a screenplay. Oh,
Mhm.
it's awful. It's absolutely
It's
awful. But I absolutely love the process of doing it, only
right.
because recently I've been reading a lot of screenplays and
Mhm.
reading the screenplays while watching the movie as well.
Mhm. That's a
And
great
then you're able to see how much has changed.
one.
But what is really wonderful
Mhm.
about that process is how the first, second, third, or even 10th draft, sometimes even in the 10th draft, you still don't know what you're trying to say.
Mhm.
And it isn't until years later that I realize, oh, okay, the main character of that story, the one that I wrote, that's not the person who should be the main character. It was supposed to be flipped around. So it was just
Yep,
really, really interesting. And I love the fact that you are there being a mentor and a coach to people who are trying to get this started. And it feels like, you have to rev the engine. You have to start driving. Otherwise, you're not going to go anywhere.
absolutely. I agree.
So now that you are I mean, you've written so many books. You've written 2 books at this point, right?
Yes.
And you're teaching others all the while building your own career. How do you balance being an artist and the mentor in a way that feels like you're able to give enough to each? Because this is, and I ask for a friend.
Mhm.
I asked for me because I'm always trying to find balance. This morning before this interview, I'm sitting there and I'm planning out my week and I'm like, oh my God, I don't have enough time to do
Mhm.
all the things that I want to do. And obviously, this is something that happens to me every single week. But I'm just really curious as to how you do it.
I'm a big planner, so I organize myself in a way and organize my calendar in a way where I'm not feeling overwhelmed. Typically if I'm super focused on, one screenplay, then, 9 times out of 10 I know like when I plan on finishing it because I'm just that, organized with like my goals and different things like that. I set really strict goals for myself when it comes to my writing. So I know if I start a script November 1st and I say I want to be done by, the end of November, then maybe during that time I shouldn't typically or like take on a mentorship, like leave the window open for like next month or something like that. Just try not to overwhelm myself and just trying to have balance with that. I mean, it's been moments where I've done both, but I feel like you said, it's kind of hard to do both at the same time. One thing I've done twice with people that have came to me and, told me they were interested in screenwriting and they gave me some of their samples and things of that nature. Aside from mentoring them, I've also, if I noticed like they were really, really good at what they did, I offered them a collaboration. So I've written two collaborations or two scripts with, two other writers, one a pilot and one a feature film. I mean, that's a good way for them to learn too if we're going back and forth and doing it together. Because even prior to mentorship, I had never done any collaborations with scripts. So actually,
Nice.
putting two brains together and like going back and forth with a script is, I feel like a learning experience for both parties because I learn from them, they learn from me, and we come together and we talk about these characters and where we want the story to go next. So I enjoy doing that for sure.
That sounds like such a gift. Wow. And
Yeah.
such a compliment too, because somebody comes in, you're supposed to be your coach, and
Mhm.
you're like, "Damn, this is so good. Let's work on it together." That
Mhm.
must be really wonderful. All
Yeah.
right. So
Yeah.
the next question I was going to ask you, oh yes, here it is. On those days when you're locking it in and you're trying to meet the deadline that you've set for yourself, what does your routine look like? Your writing routine?
Turning my turning my phone off. Sometimes I have to do that because those phones are distracting. Yeah, definitely turning the phone off, making sure I've eaten, and giving myself. I typically, if I have to meet a goal by a certain day, just leading up to that, I split it up as far as like how many pages I'm gonna write a night or a day or whatever. So that's how I stay disciplined and know, okay, I have to, do these 5 or 10 pages tonight, like in order to reach my goal in a couple of weeks. So yeah, locking in, turning that phone off, making sure I've eaten, and looking at the time and saying, okay, you have to work tomorrow. So you got to get up for work in the morning. So you need to knock these 10 pages out within the next hour or two. You know what I mean? And yeah, just focusing. I feel like one of the things that holds me up sometimes is I have to remind myself that that first draft is gonna be trash. You know what I mean? Like I will delay a script because I'm overthinking and I'm like, I don't have the perfect idea yet, but it's like, you know what I mean? Or like I'm at a good point, but like I don't know where to take the story next. It's like just get something out. Like you literally have to tell yourself that or you'll just have a bunch of scripts that you haven't finished.
Are you surprised how, despite the fact that you know this,
Mhm.
that sometimes you just have to keep telling yourself the same thing?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Especially I just feel like as a creative, as a writer, like you have to be like your own motivator a lot of times. You know what I mean? Like I feel like you'll have a few people that see the vision, but and you appreciate them, but nobody really knows like what it takes to like, you know, be up at night writing, like and committing to something that, only you and God understand. You know what I mean? Like
Mm.
it's hard to explain it, so you just have to really, really believe in yourself and be dedicated and just have faith because it's hard. It's not an easy career, but it's one of those things where like even on the days that, I've gotten frustrated, I'm like, I know like that's what makes me happiest. Like even, if it's not paying my bills right now or whatever, it's like I know what, God has shown me and how close I've been and especially like not to go off subject, but like I feel like I've been in like a quiet season lately. And like
Oh.
it's been like stressful behind the scenes because I feel like when I first, graduated college and dabbled into the industry, like God exposed me to so many things and like so many opportunities. Like I was getting right off the bat with like just, you know, being fresh out of college and being around all these celebrities and all these different sets and all of that. And so it was just like, I feel like people, were looking at me and was like, dang, how is she doing all of this? Like, but then like you get older and you have different responsibilities and things like that. So it gets quiet, you know what I mean? Like you just you my main thing has been writing. So it's a thing of like now for me is how can I, really perfect these scripts in order to get it to the Hollywood level. You know what I mean? I've met all these people, I've done all these things, but like it's just a kind of a waiting process, you know what I mean? And it's everyone's not built for it.
No, people, not everyone's constitution is built for it,
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
And it also sounds like you're in your winter in some ways. We did this episode on sometimes when you are in your winter and nothing much is happening and you look around, everything is blanketed by snow.
Mhm.
What we don't know is what's happening underneath the soil,
Mm,
right? There are your bulbs have been planted, right? You've planted them all over these different fields,
mhm.
and it's just a matter of time until the snow thaws
Right.
and those bulbs start coming out. And then before you
Yeah,
know it, it's a field of
yeah.
flowers.
I agree.
Okay, so last thing for you, is there a question that you haven't been asked that you've been wanting to answer or something that you've been musing on?
Maybe like what's my dream project? I don't think I've been asked that like lately. Um,
Okay. So,
yeah.
Aaliyah, what's your dream project? Because you're almost there, you've been writing for years and you're waiting for your shot. If you had, whichever studio came to you and said, whatever screenplay you can produce, we will make it. What would that be for you?
Okay, so there's two. So of course I gotta do Four Voices Unheard just because I feel like that's my Emmy winner, saying being that, it'll be a limited series. So um gotta do that one. I know that requires a huge budget. Because it's just, so much information, you know what I mean, and so many characters and all that. Because my family is pretty big, but I would definitely say Four Voices Unheard, and then I've been wanting to um, be a part of Queen Latifah's biopic because I'm a big fan, and I saw last year that they announced they had a deal with I think Will Smith's production company, and they were going to produce a slate of different hip hop biopics, and I was like, I know they said Queen Latifah was supposed to be the first one, and so I've been trying to like figure out, you know, who to get in touch with, how to get in touch with somebody in order to be a part and maybe write that script. I've met her a few times and worked with her um, from a distance a couple of times, and that's just always something I've been interested in. I love, telling the story or even reading about the stories of people's journeys. Growing up, like I said, I was a big reader, so whenever I went to the public library, I was always renting out autobiographies. Like I was like 10 years old reading like LL Cool J's biography, like 300 pages. And like, I just like stuff like that. I like learning, what people went through and just how they overcame adversity and all that. So her just being somebody I've always admired, I'm like, it's no coincidence that, I met her on my first film as a director's assistant, and then, have connected with all these different people around her. So, I think that would be, just a full circle moment to be able to, bring that story to life.
Well, Aaliyah, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Same here. Thank you so much.
Hi there. If you're loving the show, would you mind taking a quick second to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite go-to podcast app? While you're at it, subscribe to our Substack newsletter, Creative Matters. You can find the link to subscribe in the show notes. All right, that's all that I have for you today.